Hi everyone, welcome back to Rachel's Studio. I have a super wonderful treat. I have my wonderful friend Barbie Mathis here with me to share a technique that I've been wanting to learn forever. And I've finally pegged her down to share this really cool batik technique with you all and me. So we're going to be learning together. So if you're new here, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel Parker Varner, and I teach not just the how, but the why of watercolor, so you can move along your watercolor journey a lot faster. And I do have a couple free ways that you can follow me. I've got my Patreon, which you can join that for free, and then you'll stay more in touch with me and all the projects that I have going on. And you can also join my Facebook group where you can share your work. And you're a member of my Facebook group too, right?
Yes.
And so it's a lot of fun because people can post their paintings and get feedback if they ask for it. And it's just a great way to be supported by a community of like-minded artists. So I hope you will join that. But I think that's all the business end, and we can jump into introducing you.
Okay.
And this is my friend Barbie. We met so many years ago.
A long time ago.
And when I say she's a friend, she really is a close friend. She comes to all my Thanksgivings. We've done every Thanksgiving for at least the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah,
I feel like
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like they're my family. So.
Yeah, Barbie and her daughter come to our Thanksgiving, so she's a very good friend, and I'm very excited to be able to feature her because she's very talented. She does watercolor, she does acrylic, she does really cool what's the paper? The collage. I love your collage work. And your daughter actually is a very talented artist as well. So it's just runs in the family genes, all the talent between you and your daughter. So, but today we're going to learn about batik. And Barbie knows that technique from one of the founding artists of that technique, right?
Yes, I didn't actually meet her, but I knew somebody who took from her, and then she passed on her information to me.
Yeah, neat.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't you share a little bit about your artistic journey and just whatever you want to share about how we come to this day with you sharing this. What's your artistic journey? How'd you start in art?
Okay. I have loved art forever. I mean, I can remember in 3rd grade winning my first art prize because I sculpted a turquoise prairie dog. And that was when I lived in Colorado. And then after that, I used to see my sister drawing pictures of the Beatles and all of that. And so I started drawing. And then all of a sudden I got interested in fashion in high school. And so I thought, I really want to be a fashion illustrator. And so I drew with charcoal and also pen and ink. And then when I took fashion design at Potter Fashion College in Atlanta, they had an illustration program, and that's what really lit me up, you know, as far as doing that kind of thing. And so later on, when I didn't live in Atlanta anymore, there really wasn't any kind of advertising that I could do. So I worked in graphic design, and eventually decided I was really tired of working in black and white because that's what it was at that time. And then, so I took a couple of watercolor classes, and my watercolor teacher, you know, I had told her I was a beginner because I had never done anything in color before, but I had all of that other art background. And so it was a natural step for me to go into watercolor. And then I had the opportunity to work with some really nationally known watercolor artists because when I lived in Sarasota, Florida, there was a place where it was called the Leach Studio, and I don't think it exists now, but it was founded by Hilton Leach, who was a well-known artist at the time. And so nationally known artists would come there, and I got to monitor for their workshops because at that point of time, I could volunteer and do that kind of thing. And so every week I saw amazing artists, and I owe it all to them as far as my knowledge of art.
Neat.
Yeah.
And so now what's the main thing that you do with your art, right?
Okay, well now what I do, I love teaching. And so I've had the opportunity to teach watercolor and acrylic at City Art in Columbia, South Carolina, and also private students, and then a few other local areas, and as well as a few other workshops around the state. And I did one in Florida too.
Okay.
And so I do like to travel and do that kind of thing. So that's really my main thing. I do show my work at City Art in Columbia. And
How can viewers find you online?
okay, there are several ways. I mean, my website's a little bit out of date, but it's www.barbiemathis.com. And I also have Instagram at Barbie Mathis Art, two Facebooks, Barbie Mathis Studio, and also my personal Facebook, Barbie Smith Mathis. But I tend to post more on there, and I make them public. So, you know, if something happens and I don't friend you, if you try to friend me, you'll be able to see most of it that way. So
we'll put those links up here so everyone can find your work. I did want to ask you, what's your proudest achievement as an artist?
Oh, my goal for the longest time was to become a signature member of the South Carolina Water Media Society when it was the Watercolor Society. And so the reason I'm proud of that is that I did get in, I can't remember what year, it was like 2006 or 7. And it's a Member of Excellence Award because you've been juried into 3 shows. And that just means that people who know more than I do recognize some sort of talent whatsoever. And I got to be in those shows, and they were traveling shows. And so that was really exciting.
Yeah. And by the way, the South Carolina Water Media Show just wrapped, and you can go look on the website for this year's show and you can see all the art. And it really is an amazing society. It may sound small, South Carolina, but the show is a national show.
Right.
And we really get some top level, national level artists in that show. So it really is a big deal to get your signature membership in that society, which I have one more show. I've done 2 shows that I've gotten into, so I have one more too. So
great.
Then I'll be in.
This will be so exciting because I know she's going to do it with all of your other awards you've gotten recently.
Yeah. So definitely check out South Carolina Water Media Society if you would like to start entering your fine art into shows. It's a great show, and but it'll be about a year before they open it up for the next show. But the next show will be actually in the spring. It'll be an online digital show, so be on the lookout for that. And they also do a really fun in-person event where it's a plein air event in Newberry, which is a really darling town here in South Carolina, and a lot of artists, a lot of members get together, and it doesn't just have to be watercolor. It can be any water media, including acrylic. So in the National Water Media Show, it is water media, so it's not just watercolor, just so more people are able to enter. So we'd love to have you enter that show. So
I think so. I want everybody to know that it's helpful if you're a watercolorist to know a layering technique. And one person that influenced me most was Linda Stevens Moyer. And she didn't do batiks, but she did a layering process from light to dark in her watercolors. And so a knowledge of that and values is really important for batiks as well. And I think that's about it as far as...
It's interesting you say that, because I've been making a point lately. I like to paint a la prima, which is more of a Charles Reed, splash it on and don't fuss too much and be really loose. But a lot of beginners get lost in that process because it can be a more advanced way to paint. So I've been making a point lately to do more tutorials for my online students using that layering technique, and it really is an easier way to paint. And I think it's a good way to start learning watercolor because you learn how to control it and you get really realistic results. And what beginners don't realize sometimes, I think, is that it's easier to make realism look really impressive if you learn these layering techniques, and it can really give you some confidence to get started early in your watercolor journey to learn those techniques that aren't too hard to master, but they are really key to achieving a lot of realism, and it can really give you some confidence, and then you can use that as a jumping off point to your next level of developing as an artist. So I've been making a point on my Patreon to teach. The last 2 tutorials were really in-depth, like 3-hour long, start to finish, real-time tutorials, using layering. So that's interesting that you mentioned that. But anyway, let's talk about what we're going to do today.
Okay.
Because this is the thing I noticed. I learned about batik when I was in the gallery with you. We were hanging in a brick and mortar gallery, and Karen Langley had some batik pieces in there. And I loved how it looked. It was so pretty, and it's transparent. It looks very watercolor style with that transparent, beautiful color look. And then I love splash, and I've shared videos here on my channel. I have shared videos on my channel showing my viewers the Splash Books, which is a international watercolor competition. The most amazing artists get in, and one of the pieces that got in was a batik.
Yes.
So I didn't know that
amazing.
it was. I guess it's considered watercolor. Is it?
It
considered
is watercolor because you do use watercolors to paint in the batik.
So that's why.
You know, you use a special kind of paper. Most people use rice papers. We're going to be using genwashi paper. But you use, if you're a watercolorist, you use your watercolors. And also a micron pen, you know, to help define everything. But
I love that look too.
Yeah.
With the micron pen. It really pulls it together in the end, and it just makes it look gorgeous.
Right. And so I did take from Karen Langley, who is a local artist, but she originally took from Kathie George, and that's the technique that we're going to use is Kathie George's technique, who also can be found on YouTube.
Okay, so she's still making YouTube videos?
Well, she is not making them, but somebody made them of her doing a couple of different things. And
so I will link some of these in the description, in the comments, so that you can find them.
Right. And I might also have my own list that you might be able to link also, you know, with supplies and things like that. Because I know at first you think, well, what do I use? And so we'll go over that.
Yeah.
And there'll be a link.
And if you have questions, be sure to leave them in the comments, because Barbie will be checking comments. I'll be checking comments, and we'll respond to your questions if we miss anything.
Right. That sounds great. Yeah, we can do that.
All right. So it's using watercolor, but it's on an Asian type of paper, right?
Yes.
Do you want to kind of go over the we started talking about all the supplies earlier. This might be a good time to segue into what supplies are we going to need. So do you want to segue into that and just talk about some of the supplies? And
we may want to set them up.
And we'll go get them. And
yes,
okay.
That sounds good.
All right, we'll be right back.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to go over the supplies for watercolor batiks. And the supply list looks quite long, but when you start getting it together, it's not much at all. And the first thing that we would need is genwashi rice paper for this particular technique. The paper itself has a rough side and a smooth side, and we'll be working on the smooth side to do all of your drawing and everything. But we'll go over that in just a minute. Also, another thing you're going to need is a wax pot or wax burner. This is an old potpourri burner, and it just heats the wax very slowly, so you know, there's no danger of fire or anything. And the kind of wax that I use is Gulf wax. Also, I like Reynolds freezer paper as the base for my batik. Then also you're going to need some black paper or poster board. You can slide it under the paper and you'll be able to see where the wax is. And also wax paper will help so that you can keep your base clean while you're working on it. And I just used my regular watercolor palette that you would normally use. Basically what you're going to need for watercolor for this Poinsettia batik is what I use for everything actually. I like 2 yellows, 2 reds, maybe, you know, or maybe even 3 reds. I like Winsor red, alizarin crimson, permanent rose or quinacridone magenta, and then I like 2 blues that I use all the time, phthalo blue, green shade, and ultramarine blue. And then there's some other earthy colors such as burnt sienna. I rarely use phthalo green just by itself because it's so bright, but that mixed with alizarin crimson makes a fantastic dark. And then all of the other colors, I mean, some people will include sap green on their palette, but I mix most of my greens, purples, oranges, which are the complementary colors, and all of my darks. You know, if it's helpful, sometimes you're also going to need some natural hair brushes that are really cheapy brushes that like you would find in a craft pack of brushes. You have to use natural hair in order to put it into the wax. You're going to need newspapers for the end for ironing and iron. Here we have containers of water, a hair dryer, and what is really important is a photocopy of your image. And what you want to do is have a photocopy that has a good value range of colors, maybe 5 to 7 values from light to dark. Here is the copy that I'm using today. My copier is not necessarily very good. What I have done is I made a copy of my tracing. So like maybe one is this size, one is good for a 5x7. You know, I have it both ways with the loose lines and also with the shadows, just so that I can see it very well. And the something that I'm experimenting with now is this one is a photocopy of my design on the Genwashi rice paper.
Now, did you print that out on your home printer?
On my home printer that's 12 years old, and it came out pretty well.
Yeah.
And the only thing I suggest is when I did the first tracing, I put lines around it. The first thing that I do then, this is the copy of the one that I have traced onto the Genwashi paper. And
what do you use to trace onto the paper? Is that pen?
Yes, and okay, so do not use Sharpie marker because it's not permanent, and so when you iron it or you know, get it wet too many times, it will fade. So I like micron pens, and the best size to use is, well, that I think is a good size to use is the 0.5. It comes in 0.3s. I mean, you can experiment with this. So that's what I used to trace with. And like I said, I just traced the lines, and I went ahead and did that step already. As you can see, I didn't block in all of the darks because that will come with the paint. So when I get ready to paint, I will take wax paper, and it's just a lot of the stuff you can just get at the grocery store. But this will keep it fairly clean, to just put a piece of wax paper under it. And so at this point, now we're ready to paint.
All right, voiceover Rachel here. Next, I'm going to speed up the footage and do a voiceover for it, because what I realized the day that we filmed this process is this took at least 3 hours to create this batik, which is not suitable for a single YouTube video. So in the interest of time, I'm going to do a voiceover of all the sped up start to finish footage so you can get a gist of the full process, so you have the information you need to decide if you want to invest in some of the new supplies and also time to create these gorgeous batik watercolor paintings. Also, this is a new series I've been doing on my channel with the new 3-minute shorts I've uploaded. They cram as much information and tips of the footage start to finish of my paintings, of several of my watercolor tutorials, so you can see what is involved before you dive into the full project on my Patreon, and all the while picking up the best key tips I can think of to share for how I painted the painting. I hold nothing back in any of my paid or free content. Also, my last 2 free full-length YouTube videos on my channel were in that same style, sped up. So they're about 20 minutes long, so I can cram in more amazing watercolor tips and explain more of not just the how, but also the why of watercolor. My last 2 free full-length 20-minute plus videos on my channel show you the start to finish process of 2 paintings I did recently of the tuxedo cat with ribbon and a fox portrait, both using the kind of layering techniques Barbie mentioned earlier in this video. So be sure to check those out. There's so much to learn. To watch all the 2.5 hours of footage of this watercolor batik, it will be available on my Patreon in real time with no ads, about 2.5 hours, in fact, with Barbie explaining in depth about more about supplies, her process, colors, mixing, tracing techniques with both overhead camera and room camera angles, which will be worth your time if you decide to try batik, which would make a fabulous holiday card, might I add. All my tutorials, which number well over 100, include supply lists, reference photo, and a line drawing too, including for this watercolor batik. Okay, so here we go with the sped up footage. All right, so what you see here is her line drawing that she put on her rice paper on the smooth side. Remember that, with her Pigma Micron pen. And she also talked about how she experimented getting this line drawing directly onto her rice paper by putting it in her fairly cheap printer. So I think that's genius. And this is her reference photo that she took of some poinsettias. And she also talked a lot about how these poinsettias have interesting negative shapes. They jut out into the negative space and they have really pretty shadows and colors and a nice variety of values. So she did discuss that as well, as being a good subject for this kind of painting style. So this is the painting that we're going to be doing today. She was just showing everybody the finished painting that she did as a practice before she came and filmed with me. It came out so beautiful. And this is the rice paper she's going to use today. You don't have to use this particular rice paper, but she this is her favorite. All right, so she's going to start off with yellow, just like she talked about in her layering technique, where you start out with the yellows, which are kind of the lighter color. So that makes sense. And so this is going to be the underpainting. And like I've talked about in my channel before, if you want to make your reds look like they're really popping, beautiful red, glowing red, do an underpainting like this of yellow, and it's really going to pop your reds. Also, the same is true of leaves, of green leaves, anything green. You'll really make your green beautiful and glowing green if you put an underpainting of yellow underneath it. So the basic premise of these batiks is paint your lightest lights and then do a layer of wax. And wax acts just like, if you're familiar with using masking, the masking you paint on your watercolor paper saves the lightest lights, or whatever dried paint you paint it over. The same is true with the wax. So the idea is, and what she could have done actually is put some wax on the pure white paper to have some gorgeous pure white highlights. I think that would be so pretty, like to spatter on some wax first and then do your yellow. And then that would give you a spattering of whites, or wherever you wax, it would save the white of your paper. And so here she goes with her wax, which is completely melted. And she's going to do the first layer of wax. Now, of course, you have to let your paper completely dry. And then wherever you want some lighter highlights, like a perfect example is the anthers in the reference, which are pure yellow. Definitely you would wax those little dots of wax in the middle of each poinsettia. But also wherever you want to have highlights of light hitting your poinsettia leaves and petals, you would put wax. Let that completely dry. The wax doesn't take long to dry. What takes longer to dry in this process is the paint. And she used a hairdryer in between each painting session. You don't want your hairdryer to get too hot. It will melt the wax too much. But here she goes with some reds. She has a couple favorite reds. She uses a permanent rose type color. She uses a Windsor red, and she also likes alizarin crimson. And she talked in depth about how she really likes these colors, and she likes to use a variety of about 3 different reds because they add an interesting variety of colors to her painting. So she was using a combination of Windsor red, alizarin crimson, and a rose leaning color to paint on all these reds after her wax had dried. And so you can see she's covering up most of that underpainting. And she also made the point of, as you begin your painting, you use a larger brush. And then as the painting progresses, and this is true in any watercolor painting, you use smaller and smaller brushes for smaller and smaller details for darker and darker areas. So in watercolor, you start with yellow and then you move to red and then you do your blue layer. Now she's going to do some green. She's completely dried this and she's going to put some green on where the leaves are. And by the way, you can see that very top leaf she just did. See where there's highlights? That's from the wax. So that's an easy spot to see where she has the wax, for example, in the leaves. And she talked about her favorite green. It's one that I don't use, but she convinced me to try it, the Green Appetite by Daniel Smith. And then to get this darker green you see her doing, she added what she says is one of her very favorite colors, which is Payne's Gray. And she mixes the Payne's Gray, for example, into a green or a red or whatever color to make it darker and richer. So these darker greens you see are a mix of her green, whatever green you want to use, with Payne's Gray, which I thought was really interesting. And don't get too hung up on color mixing and get the exact right color. That's not important. What's important is get your lights light, your mediums medium, and your darks dark. And so for this blue, she used another mix I would never use, phthalo blue and alizarin crimson for that purple at the base of the painting that she just did. All right, so now she is going to do some wax. She splattered some wax and on a completely dried painting. By the way, if you decide to use a hair dryer, remember to use the lowest setting. You don't want to melt that wax too much. And so here goes on another layer of the wax, and she's just putting it where she wants highlights. And you can see where it's wet. And because she has the wax paper under her painting, that's helping it not to stick to the black paper, she put the black paper under her painting so she can see where the wax is. So as you can see, she's kind of painting the wax kind of in a pattern of where the folds and the poinsettia would be, where maybe there would be highlights. So again, she's using cheap natural hair brushes that she keeps just for painting with wax. And she's getting this wax pretty evenly distributed throughout the painting. So there's balance. Just putting it where she wants to save the lights, because the next layer of reds will be darker reds and those lighter reds will be protected by the wax. So here comes the richer reds that she puts in with more pure alizarin crimson, maybe with a little bit of phthalo blue there, where it's really a purple red. So she's putting in her darkest reds, and she talked about how she was speeding up this process for the good of this tutorial, but you can really do a lot more layers than this and make it a lot more nuanced and more refined. But as you'll see at the end, it's going to be gorgeous. But so here goes on her deeper red layer. This is the same exact process that I highly encourage you to do a search for negative paint pouring technique that uses this same idea with masking. It's gorgeous, and there's some amazing YouTube videos about that. And this is the same idea of applying masking at different stages of your painting to cover up subsequent highlights to get a really pretty effect. All right, for this background, she's using a blue. I believe she used ultramarine blue. You could use cobalt, you could use phthalo, whatever your favorite blue is. And she's just filling that in a bit to pop out these reds. You could leave it pure white. That would be pretty too. And she checks her edges with that frame to make sure she's getting the blue far enough into the edges. And then she dried it. And now that it's dry, she can put in her super darks. She didn't do another layer of masking or wax, although she could have. But notice how now she's using her super darks in the middle of each poinsettia to paint around the stamens. Actually, the wax keeps the stamens or the anthers, I guess you would call them, light. But the super darks help tell the viewer's eye where to look and also give definition to each poinsettia so you can see you're looking at several different poinsettia flowers. She's also putting some darks around the edges of some of the poinsettia petals to really tell the story of the edges of the flowers to give it some shape. And also these darks give the painting a lot more depth. And she was talking about when she started winning awards with her work, what changed. And she said one of the things that helped her win awards was both having contrast in her paintings and good composition. So I thought those were some interesting tips. And there's so many more to be shared in the 2.5-hour full-length tutorial where she shared some of her best tips, some of her favorite artists and where to find them, and some of the artists that really shaped her journey as an artist. But okay, so now everything's completely dry. She had to blow dry it to get this dry. She's got the wax and she's painting over the entire thing. You see it's getting stuck to that wax paper underneath. But she's painting wax on the entire painting. And then the crazy part, y'all, is when she balls it up into a tight ball to crinkle the wax. So the next step, when she spatters on the Payne's Gray, this is Payne's Gray, she's spattering on, it kind of seeps into some of those cracks and makes a really cool effect. And some artists really rub the paint into those cracks even more. And then, even while the paint is still wet, she pats on more wax over all those spatters and kinds of rubs the paint around, and it gets into the cracks and it makes the coolest effect. All right, so then she lets everything dry. The wax doesn't take long to dry. She sets her iron up to be really hot, and then she puts it between about 5 layers underneath the batik and 5 layers on top. And she irons it with a really hot iron. And you can see how the wax melts up into the paper and it gets the wax out of the batik painting. And so she had to just keep changing the paper out. So you need a lot of paper. And she talked about how you can just get, if you don't have access to newspaper, that was a whole discussion we had about how we don't have newspapers anymore. We had a lot of interesting behind the scenes discussions that I just leave in the whole thing because I don't know, it's just kind of hanging out with a couple artists, talk about their art and everything like that. So it is fun. You'll enjoy the full length tutorial. Even if you don't want to paint a batik, you'll just hear us talking about both the techniques used in this and our own art journeys and all that. So it's like hanging out with us. But she just keeps ironing until all the wax is out of the painting. All right, we're going to switch back to Barbie talking. We're going to sign this, so I'm going to let you listen in again to her explain more in real time for the grand finale. Here we go.
We've gone ahead and ironed the piece, and this is what we've come out with. This is the one I did today, and this was my sample piece that I did the other day. And so one thing that I like to do at the very end is use a working mat and put this on here. And sometimes that will reveal if you need to fix some places or what it's going to look like. And right away, I see that I've left a little bit too light of a place right here. Since that's not the focal point, I want to take my attention off of this and put my attention more over here. And so one way to fix that is that sometimes you can go back with just a little bit of watercolor, and I'm just using a little bit more alizarin crimson, and let's see how this works. It still has a little bit of wax in it, but I can cover up some of that. I might just quiet it down. Just quiet it down just a little bit. I don't think I want to leave that. And if your paint is not working on it, you can also use pastel pencils, or I could even go back in certain places and touch it with the micron pen. There's a lot of things that you can do to that. So that helps that part a little bit. And I think that that's all that I want to do with this today. Is there anything else you would like to say about it?
I mean, I think it's gorgeous. I love this style. I think it looks really great. I like how these they look like they're glowing in the light. And it's because of that yellow underpainting.
Yeah, I might touch this just a little bit and quiet that down right there so that everything else will come out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I'm going to call this one done. And
Yay.
They all look natural, so
They do.
I believe this one is done.
Yay. All right, so show us how you sign on this kind of paper.
Okay, and so I will take a micron pen, and you can choose anywhere that you think that it will show up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if the black will show up right here. I tend to want to go in a plain area to sign.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to sign right here.
If it fits you.
Be an older pen right here, so I might have to go over it one more time, but yeah, I'm going to have to go over one more time. But
Yes.
this is that's what I do. I sign right
Yeah.
in that area.
That looks good.
So, and I haven't signed that one, so I'll go back and do that. And see, they came out different. This one has a lighter tablecloth on it, and this is a little bit, blended into the background.
Yep.
So, anyway,
And this one really glows with that. I just love those leaves. I really like how the leaves have so much warmth in them.
right, and if I was going to add anything with colored pencils or anything, and don't use the wax-based pencils, but use the pastel because you can blend it more. But I would touch a few more of the middles and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Yeah, put some white maybe in the
you're right.
middle, which you could do with gouache or I don't know if gel pen would work. Pastel maybe.
You might even be able to use gel pen, but here's a little tiny bit of the white gouache right here with a little bit of yellow. Let's see if that works.
That does it.
It actually does. So I would just let that dry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're through with this.
All right.
So let's touch here. If I keep going, I'll just mess with it. But
Yeah. Us artists, we just keep
So-
messing. All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming and spending the day with me. And I think this turned out beautiful, and I can't wait to try this myself. So
Well, I've enjoyed it so much. Anytime.
thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.
Bye. So the first thing that I like to do, since we're just getting started, is I'll take a spray bottle and start spraying some of my paints to make sure that they're good and moist.